Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Fuds on Film. I am Craig Eastman and today as always with me Scott Morris.
Hello.
Andrew Tavendale.
I protest.
On this... Dare I ask why?
Well, I'm not as solid as it would be about it being a century, but this isn't the end of a decade.
No, it's not.
I can count.
No, we know. Don't do that thing because we had this all at the millennium. Nobody cares, Drew. Only you.
Yes, but that's fine because I'm me.
Good. We didn't start with the year zero. That's what Drew's trying to tell you. So, aside from that, in our decade review show, which is what we are doing this episode, we will not be looking necessarily at our favourite movies from the last decade, because I think it's safe to say that podcasts on that topic are 10 a penny. Instead, we are going to be taking a bit of a dive into the trends that have emerged in the movie-going experience over these last 10 years or so, how they're shaping up, how we feel about them, what they will probably or may look like going forward, and whether or not we should all be gratefully afeared for our beloved cinema chains. So I think first and foremost, if we start with the first trend that I posited, from which I think probably a lot of the other discussions will arise naturally, and we'll work our way around them as we see fit as we move forward. But I think it's probably safe to say that the biggest change to the cinematic landscape and people's viewing habits over the last 10 years has been the rise of streaming services. Perhaps the biggest change to the fabric of cinema since the introduction of sound. Yes, even bigger than 3D. Nothing defines the shape of the last decade in cinema viewing quite so much as the advent and the rise of streaming services, spearheaded by Netflix, and now so de facto a part of brand portfolios that Disney, Apple, and pretty much everyone else have had their hands forced into joining the arena. While cable pioneers like HBO may have laid the groundwork for this kind of thing as far back as the 80s, the streaming platforms differ in scale and intent in that they have overtly staked their claim as challengers to the traditional business of distributing and exhibiting movies, demonstrating their willingness to spend as much, if not more, capital on their product than the studio system. Coupled with the proliferation of ever larger high-quality digital consumer displays and sound systems, the streamers have leveraged the fact that the average consumer setup is now at least on a par with a low-end cinema experience, and $4 to $5 grand, probably, if you want to spend it, will get you somewhere equal to the best. I suppose, generally speaking, then, just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Drew, I'm going to punt to you. Are you pro-streaming?
In general, I would say yes. It is undoubtedly convenient. Which in many cases can overcome the inherent poorer video quality, although that's getting better itself. And there's a huge library available at your fingertips. I'm slightly less happy about the fact that I was already paralysed by choice when it came to just disc-based media. Things are considerably worse now. But yes, in general, I see no problem with it. I prefer the cinema experience, and my only worry is that it may lead eventually to cinemas going away. But in terms of it's a useful technology, it's fine. And it's maybe just, handily showing up the fact that Steven Spielberg's fully got into his crotchety old man's face. Because, well, while you might prefer the cinema experience, the films themselves are still films. They haven't changed just because of the medium you watch them on.
Quite. Is there still value in paying £15 to sit in a dark room among other people's farts with no ushers to wrangle the mobile phone users and no projectionist to notice that the focus is out for the first 15 minutes? Is that still something that you're willing to do? Or to put it another way, do you mind if home viewing becomes the default and cinema becomes the occasional treat?
That's really what it is for me at the minute anyway. Having moved like an hour away from the nearest cinema and an hour back, then it is certainly rarer that I go there. It's I still want to go to the cinema though. I would still there's no film that I've seen, even for the films that really aren't particularly enhanced by being in a cinema, that I've not watched at home and thought I'd probably rather have seen that in the cinema.
Yes, I prefer. You can't really beat a expensive cinema sound system and like the 50-foot high screen. There is no equivalent.
We'll talk about, I suppose, because one of the points, obviously, we're going to talk about later, and this is not to jump the gun, but it is literally, I suppose, the last point on the list, so it's worth mentioning now that we will get around to it, is the cinema experience and the fact that cinemas seem to be doubling down on gimmicks in the meantime. I hadn't really considered from your point of view, Scott, that I suppose as prolific as cinemas have become in the last 20 years, because I feel like there was a period there where actually the number of cinemas started to shrink. And I don't know if the figures, if paperwork will back that up. I feel like there was a point where sort of cinemas were disappearing out of towns, but then they started to re-emerge again in the sort of out of town shopping parks, etc. And they seem to be more prolific than ever now. But having said that, there is still a sizable, number of people in any given country, I suppose, where you would fall into this bracket, Scott, where it's not just a 10-minute trip in the car to actually get to a cinema. So I suppose you might feel quite differently about it than myself or Drew do, where we have the option of being sort of 15, 20 minutes away from a cinema if needs be, if the urge takes us. So I guess I hadn't considered that. I don't know. I always find myself questioning my own perspective and stuff. When I find myself questioning change and being a miserly old grump about it, I usually stop and think, right, as an immediate response to myself, I'm going to assume I'm probably wrong. But I'm not in a position whereby, I haven't spent $4,000 to $5,000 on a home cinema system at the minute, so my experience at home is okay. I don't have an issue with it. I have a decent enough sound setup. I've got a decent enough television, but I'm not going to get the full experience of, something like the next Christopher Nolan film is undoubtedly going to be better in a cinema than it is in my home setup.
Yeah,
but I suppose the prevailing attitude is that people are less inclined to worry about that, and there a generation are growing up watching that kind of thing on their mobile phones. If we're to believe what we're being told.
Yeah, I do think it is. When filmmakers complain about this, I can at least see some of the point. I mean, particularly if it's something like Mad Max is a particular one for me. Watching that in the cinema with all the huge bass straps and everything going around, it was a heck of an experience. And I've watched it at home since. I still like the film, but it's nothing like the same without that cinematic experience that's there around it. So, yeah. But there are so many films where it doesn't really make a great deal of difference, and the convenience of it is so much greater, or at least it was, when Netflix really came into its ascendancy, when it was basically everything you wanted was on Netflix. It seemed like an ideal fantasy land. And then Amazon started pushing Prime. It's like, okay, now I need Netflix and Prime and to balance where something's going to be. And as you mentioned, the proliferation of it means that this is getting progressively worse to the point where it's now easier to go back to torrenting stuff. So I think that's probably where the future of streaming is going to be torrents until enough of them fail to get back down to some sort of sustainable procedure.
Exactly, Scott, because they didn't learn their lesson, did they? The reason that pirating took off was because fast internet connections were available, and it was much more convenient than having to pay for all of the channels on cable. Then things like Netflix take off. There's only one or two services, say them and Amazon, as you mentioned. It's really convenient. People think, well, I'll pay for this. It's not that expensive and it's convenient. But now everyone's taken all their own content back in-house. Everyone said, we need to have a streaming platform. And then so the bill ends up being as much as it was for all the cable TV that people got rid of. And it's just because the people that run these companies are morons.
Yes.
We've got to have our own one instead of just like, oh no, let's just keep selling it to Netflix, and then people will go to Netflix and we'll get a nice steady income stream from selling Friends to Netflix, or telling TV in that case, obviously. But no, these people are greedy morons who can't see.
We don't want a bigger slice of the pie. We want more pies. Yeah. Pies everywhere.
What's interesting to me about that, right, is that yes, the argument about the fact that all in, pick 3 or 4 of these streaming services. I mean, I only use Netflix at the minute. I have a vested interest, having 2 young kids, in thinking about Disney Plus when it becomes available over here. But again, as an aside, in the meantime, am I going to torrent The Mandalorian? Probably. But I still think, with the combined price of those approaching something that you might pay for a cable package, I would still argue that the breadth and quality of content from the streaming services for that same price as a cable package is much higher than the general output that would be available through a cable package. And the thing that I'm really struggling to understand at the minute, and again, we'll probably talk about this in relation to a couple of the other topics we talk about tonight, but in terms of that quality of output, what is it that's driving that, and is it sustainable? Because I feel like the general quality of content, or certainly the marquee stuff, has gone up, and there's maybe just more volume of the marquee stuff. I mean, okay, for every Irishman, yes, there may well be a Six Underground. And I shouldn't say that because I've not watched Six Underground yet. But what is it that's driving the quality of that stuff? Because I feel like that is what's making, or at least as much as, the convenience of streaming, which I think will still probably out over torrenting. I think torrenting is more to do just a cost thing in terms of people would rather torrent something for free than pay £1 for it. Never mind 15, 20, 30 quid. For a couple of streaming packages. What is it that's driving that quality? Is it competition? And as this kind of settles down and 3 or 4 major, streaming platforms, which you could probably argue there are already, you could probably argue that there's a good case to be made that we can take a pop at sussing how this is going to pan out now already. But you're going to end up with Netflix, certainly, and Disney Plus, and whether or not they consolidate some of the other streaming platforms as they inevitably sort of fail, does then that lack of competition mean that the quality of streaming platforms is going to decrease, or is there something inherent in what these platforms are doing that just means we're getting better quality content?
I think we've seen in other markets when there's lack of competition, then quality does either progress tends to stall in pretty much any market you can think of. So I suppose logically it would depend if those remaining still need to keep producing enough high quality stuff in order to keep selling their services, which could well be enough. Certainly, even pre-streaming, HBO was pushing enough content to go and make Game of Thrones and throw all these other prestige shows that it needed that as a halo to drag in all the rest. I can see the same being true, even if you do get down to Disney and Amazon and Netflix. That's probably enough that they need to keep pushing enough good new content and a backlog of old stuff to go through to make it worth their £10, £12, £13 a month, whatever it winds up being in the future. So,
because I do think the point at which that creativity drops off, or the quality of content, of regular content, drops off, is probably the point at which we will see subscriber numbers dropping off, and you will start to see stuff being even more significantly torrented than it is presumably being in the meantime, because there is still a hell of a marketplace for torrenting, though it doesn't seem to be doing any damage to these. It doesn't seem to be having a massive impact on any of these platforms at the minute. I do wonder if it will do going forward if there is that lack of competition. But
the other access is probably the breadth of it. I mean, there's so many weirder, nicher contents that you can find in these platforms, and presumably someone's watching it. I mean, I don't think it's actually a streaming one. It's maybe American TV of some nature, but there's a whole host of DC properties that are showing up in, like, Supergirl and The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow and all these ones that no one cares or has heard about. I can't believe anyone really watches it, but apparently there are enough people that are watching it and supporting that content to keep making more of it.
Yeah, it's
and
sustainable.
series and series of it. So that's the sort of thing you might see, sort of enough of an interest from around the world in particular niche properties that can then sustain that kind of content going forward, which you couldn't do if certainly in the days when all you had was 4 terrestrial channels. So perhaps the kind of more fractured audience in that regard may help it to produce more interesting stuff for particular little niches of the audience.
And where does streaming overall go moving forward then?
Well, it will continue doing what it has been doing. It's going to keep on just snowballing and picking up more and more content in the hope that there will be enough there in the aggregate that everyone will want to pay £10 a month to access it. That seems to be the way it seems to be going. With the newer services, they will probably start falling by the wayside, apart from the ones that have very deep pockets, such as Disney and or unique content. But the attempts by various terrestrial channels to become their own streaming services, like the CBS All Access, and the various platforms that most of the British servers are trying to band together to try and, I believe, mostly to sell to Americas, but also somehow to sell our own content that we paid for back to us with BritBox and these kind of things. Those will die in a fire almost instantly. They don't have much longer for this world. But yes, the bigger fish are probably here to stay.
Yeah, I do wonder what we'll see in terms of consolidation and stuff moving forward, because it's almost inevitable. And I was having this conversation with someone the other day about what happens if what's Apple? Is it Apple TV Plus?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what they're calling it. It's not the most catchy of monikers to start with, I think, but someone was talking to me the other day about the fact that, well, it's already dying on its arse. Well, it's probably a bit premature to say that, because Apple are just we probably won't know for 12 months anyway, because Apple just seems to be giving people 12 months of it free with, the purchase of anything.
Also, if you're talking about deep pockets, then
yeah, exactly.
Well,
this is the conversation I had. They said, well, it's going to die in its arse and Apple will have to rethink. And I said to them, well,
based on what?
It's a bit premature, but I said, if that does happen and it falls flat in its arse, does Apple just buy Disney? Because they probably have the capital to do it. I think there are other options for Apple moving forward if they need it, but
let's just set aside the fact that as far as more Apple are only doing TV just now, so well out with our wheelhouse for our podcast and like focus on films. But dying on its arse based on what? And if Netflix don't give their subscriber numbers, do you really believe Apple would?
Yeah, exactly.
Apple? No, so
Apple neither need to nor want to.
So that's clearly been pulled straight out of his bum, whoever you were talking to, Craig, because where would he get the information from? Apple wouldn't release it, and you can't guess at it.
No. I think a lot of people saying this already, because there was, correct me if I'm wrong, but Apple did have, is it not The Banker or something like that? They have made inroads into sort of acquiring films from the marketplace and whatnot, although they don't have any on the platform at the minute, I don't think, right?
Yes, I'm not sure. I know everything I've heard about Apple TV Plus so far has been TV related. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were doing films, but I think they're focusing more on just building up a bank of original TV stuff at the moment.
I've already heard more than one person say, well, I've no interest in Apple TV, and it seems to be driven by quality of content, which seems to be the one thing they don't have, given the negative reviews of C or whatever that Jason Momoa thing is called, and the morning show, right?
People apparently it's not had good critical reviews, but people, like viewers, have been enjoying it apparently. So you can't even base it on that.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I'll be very interested to see where it goes moving forward, and especially Apple, because again, you talk about deep pockets, Scott, and there are none deeper than Apple's currently. So one would imagine they've probably got a few, cards up their sleeve anyway. But I suspect we'll talk around a lot more about the streaming platforms as we move forward. But to digress a bit for the meantime, the second point the second trend that I'd highlighted as feeling like it was worthy of discussion was the death of the movie star, or TV as a viable platform for big name actors. I suppose TV was previously the graveyard for those who fell from big screen grace. It started to get interesting again around the turn of the millennium, probably, with shows like 24 and CSI, where people like David Caruso got to indulge their ego and only piss off people who were mid-tier commissioners instead of studio heads as a result. Where I feel like this really kicks into high gear and makes it worthy of discussion for this podcast, though, is with the first season, probably, of True Detective in 2014, which came riding a crest, the reconnaissance, and again, it's been accelerated by those dump trucks of streaming money. So, I mean, it feels like we're at a tipping point now where gone are the days of big-name marquee actors who would traditionally have frowned upon the platform of TV. So nowadays, the perception is that it's probably as legitimate a pursuit as any. And while I dare say the likes of George Clooney maybe in no hurry to leave the comfort of Lake Como and unlimited Nespresso for something like an ER reunion, I wouldn't necessarily rule it out. So if I throw this one to you, Scott, do movie stars actually mean anything anymore? And who are they? Do they die with Tom Cruise when his insistence on stunt work in the next Mission Impossible finally sees him biting off more than he can chew by holding his breath in space while attempting to swim to the moon?
Spoilers.
You didn't know I had that leaked script.
I was thinking when I wrote this, who opens movies these days? Right? Yeah. who is a reliable marquee name that you can just stick a name on a film and people will go and see it because they are fans of that guy? And I don't think there is one anymore.
No.
I'd say maybe The Rock or Tom Cruise is about all you've got left, really.
Yeah. And everyone else has either gone by the wayside or is doing smaller works or has been...
actor more than movie star, maybe.
Yeah. So there's a few franchises that will still draw on the numbers, probably regardless of who you're plugged into them. But yeah, in terms of the actual actors themselves, yeah, they've kind of gone. And I do wonder how much of that's... Is that a quality thing? Is this because the kind of films that we're putting out, there's not enough range for people to express themselves? There's tie into stuff we'll talk about a bit later on, but yeah, there just doesn't seem to be as many films where you can become a blockbuster. When studios are only we're putting all their eggs into a couple of tentpoles rather than 3 or 4, no one really has the chance to get the same kind of levels of exposure. So in that sense, yes, the individual actors don't seem to be... getting the kind of prominence they once had back in the day. And a lot of that is, yes, because a lot of them are going to do television shows. Television no longer the movie's dumb cousin. It's arguably a greater challenge for most actors to get their teeth into something like a True Detective or any other episodic stuff where they can inhabit the same character for... 10 hours a season or something, depending on how it goes. If they're a marquee at the start of it, then it's probably a greater challenge, and the respect is there. These kind of things have kind of gone hand in hand with the rise of the prestige show and the actors coming to them. I think you're right. I can't think of anyone who you could call a movie star in the way that you could that term would be understood by someone who's dropped here from the 30s, or say.
Crucially, I don't feel like we talk anymore about actor salaries so much. We do in a certain sense in terms of we know how much of the budget of your typical Marvel movie is consumed by salary. But again, that's part of the thing is I think that you've shifted to more of an ensemble because the market seems to be moving towards these franchises and spin-offs that will typically see 1 or 2 films dedicated to an individual character and therefore will highlight a particular actor. But then the rest of the time, they are grabbing 20 minutes of screen time. Among an ensemble in this big interwoven universe of movies. And I don't think, gone are the days where you used to sit and, read the press, the movie press, and marvel at how salaries were going up. Salaries have not kept pace with inflation because you're still talking about, I know probably like back-end deals and stuff are more prolific now, but in terms of just how much actors are being paid up front, I don't know that $20 million barrier has been exceeded in like the last 20 years or thereabouts, where you had the sort of the rush from Arnie to Bruce Willis and back and forward as to who received the biggest paycheck for one movie.
Yeah.
That seems to be something that we just don't talk about anymore.
Those poor actors not getting more than 20 million. Times are hard.
Bless them. They should be on 50 by now. I know the likes of Robert Downey Jr. will have very lovely back-end deals with Marvel Studios and such like. I don't think he has to worry about buying supermarket own brand cornflakes ever again.
Yeah. And there's the thing though, you're talking about Robert Downey Jr. and that was what's in my mind too, is like, you're talking about like, franchises, are the big thing nowadays, and it's the brand that matters because people would be upset if someone other than Robert Downey Jr. were to play Tony Stark. Yeah. But Robert Downey Jr. is not going to open a film on his own.
No,
100%. Or Chris Evans or anybody else. It's the brand that matters now more than the actor.
You're right, and we went through a period from I feel like the 80s onwards, Drew, where the actor used to be the brand, and now we've swung back to the brand being the brand.
And honestly, I miss those days because I'd far rather be excited about Arnie than bloody Disney.
Yeah. You'd rather be excited about the next Dennis Quaid movie, Drew.
If it's a snuff movie, maybe.
Yeah. And if there was a Dennis Quaid and Julia Roberts movie, how we'd skip to the cinema hand in hand, Drew.
Dennis Quaid and Julia Roberts in real life bum fight.
That's it. Because even the likes of the George Clooney seem to have bowed out. And I've heard, I was listening to another podcast the other day where they were talking about this exact same thing, essentially. And they were saying, who are the movie stars who are left? And you've got Tom Cruise. And there was an argument being made for Matt Damon. And that might have been true, I think, for a very limited period of time of like 5 or 6 years maybe. But I really don't feel like that would be the case anymore. We saw Downsizing didn't exactly
I still think Matt Damon very much goes into actor rather than movie star. And I mentioned The Rock earlier. Rock is probably one of the few people up there.
I think he's the only recent one.
Yeah. George Clooney really is a man out of time. George Clooney is an actor, but he would have been a movie star in the 30s.
Yeah.
But yeah, there aren't many people nowadays. Tom Cruise is probably still in person, and even he can't be guaranteed to open a film. Look at The Mummy.
No, even Brad Pitt now as well.
Brad Pitt was the other name that was on my head, is possibly the only other movie star, I think, of that sort of size.
And even at that, the biggest success he's had recently was Once Upon a Time in America, which was not because it was a Brad Pitt movie. That's because the director was the movie star.
Perhaps the flip side of this discussion is how many actors are given the opportunity to open a film these days, given that every film that would be openable in that sense is a Disney film or a Fast and Furious film or already some installment in a franchise that's already going. There's not too much original IP getting put out there that someone could be attached their name to. Probably The Rock's been the closest there has been for that, with like some Jumanji, maybe.
Which is a sequel to that does.
Yeah, so...
And even he's taking ridiculous Netflix paychecks now.
Yeah. And The Rock's other work hasn't really done it. San Andreas was not a huge commercial success for anyone. That
or
kind
Skyscraper,
of thing.
or Rage, or Rampage, rather.
Yeah. So who else? When all the other action, all the other stars are B-list, C-list at best. Ryan Reynolds, much as I love him, Jason Statham. They're not the same caliber. They're not the same cachet you'd have with the likes of Sylvester Stallone or Arnie back in the 80s.
Also, the problem too, maybe this is something we'll come on to, Craig, because I don't have your list to hand and I don't remember it, I'm afraid. But and it's also just why I hate Disney. I know I keep watching the films too, but I hate Disney.
In fairness to you, Drew, you don't have much choice.
That's one of the big trends, and I don't want to mention too much in case it is in your list, but there's no middle ground anymore either.
Yeah, that's one of the points.
So you have the smallest films, and then you have the biggest films. The biggest films have switched from being actor-led to brand-led.
Yeah.
So there isn't really anything left for anybody else. That's where TV is taking over a lot, I think, is that middle ground.
Well, Drew, that is point number 5. We'll be talking about that in due course, but you're right. As we said before, a lot of this stuff will feed into each other, and it is worth mentioning as we go along. But yes, there isn't a lot of middle ground anymore. So outside of the mega franchise stuff, Scott is absolutely right. What is the opportunity for people to open a film? But, well, the market has spoken. Shall we move on to point 3 then and hasten it along a bit? Point 3, which was the Marvel model.
Yes, which is the market these days, I think. So.
Yes. Hi, I'm Kevin Feige, and I have a roadmap for 320 films over the next 10 years that all share the same universe. I don't think this needs much introduction. Is this just the future now? And... will the Fast and the Furious ever die, or are we going to still be looking at Fast and Furious movies 10 years from now? Is it really about family, Drew?
Well, it never was, Craig. Never ever was. I don't know. The thing is, when this current Marvel thing comes to an end, which I suspect will happen within the next decade, and they'll look to reboot it like the comics are always rebooted and things. And that'll be the real test to see whether it maintains itself after that. I really hope not. And see, I've liked a lot of the Marvel films, right? And they're undeniably well produced. The fact that they tied together so well at all is really quite impressive. They are it's well constructed, they're very well made, and they are enjoyable. But Scorsese is absolutely right, though. There's no risk in them. There's no heart in them.
Yeah.
All those people who were crying at the end of Infinity War, I continue to call morons because nothing was going to stick. It's just fake emotion. And I don't care who I offend by that because it's just, you knew it was never meaningful.
You've moved into middle age and you don't give a damn.
I was born middle-aged. But it's... I forgot your question.
No, it was about, is this Marvel model, is that all we'll see? Partly what fueled, if it helps with the conversation, Drew, partly what fueled this for me is like the talk recently of loads of people saying, do you know what would be a really smart move for Kevin Feige now? Would be for him to go over to Disney and actually start work on the next phase of all the Star Wars stuff when they're talking about an 18-month to 2-year break or whatever. And what worries me about that is that we're only a couple of years into some of these models, and we're already talking about the prospect of massive inbreeding.
Yeah, I can also see Star Wars disappear within a few years too. It's been done to death because Disney have to have all that money every year.
They paid $4 billion for it, and let's be honest, they've had their money back.
Yeah.
I kind of fear the film is going to go like video games in that people aren't going to take risks. So you're just going to get the new installment of the franchise every year, and then you'll occasionally get a film that'll surprise people, like a game that surprises people. That's the rare new IP. But yeah, I think the franchise model for the foreseeable future is what's going to happen, and people are they're very risk averse in Hollywood.
Of course, I think maybe the interesting thing about the Marvel model is it worked for Marvel, but there's not really much evidence that it's worked for anyone outside of Marvel yet. I mean, obviously DC tried that despeally.
It worked for Universal with Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
Worked for Universal with them. Failed utterly with their Dark Universe, the Mummy thing that they were trying to get off the ground.
With the last movie star ever.
Yes.
It failed with their one and only entry into, I think.
Yeah.
And Star Wars have been trying it. And
but also it's Disney.
Yes, it remains to see that kind of ties in with the next point and also the first point is how that's going to see. And whether it will continue to work for Marvel, I guess, will depend on what they do post-Endgame, if they're going to continue repeating what they did or if they're going to pivot into something that is more based around the TV streaming opportunities that is opened up by the Disney Plus services, which I think they are. So what's going to happen in this realms of their cinema stuff, it could be wildly different, or maybe it isn't. Maybe it'll be the same stuff again. Who knows? From what I remember of the roadmap, it's a bit esoteric in terms of what the Marvel properties that they have left to plumb. So it doesn't look like it's going for the same mass market, right down the middle stuff that they have done previously. So who knows? We'll need to see.
It's not an exciting crop they have coming up, is it, for people who are not into comic books, even people who are into comic books, I suspect. So
yeah, this is the thing, is that the well, I think, was revealed to be relatively shallow. Having said that, isn't it 32 films over 10 years or something crazy like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and God knows how many billions.
Yeah. What impresses me most about it is, and it's something you touched on, Drew, though, was throughout all that, and I'm not the biggest fan, and there have been some that I've really enjoyed, and there's others still that I haven't actually seen, and I might not ever get around to seeing. Like, I'm not desperate to see Age of Ultron or, the first Captain America or anything like that. No,
those are two of the worst, so those are ones you do well to avoid.
Well, no doubt as my kids get a little bit older and stuff, because I've already started watching Star Wars, as I mentioned to you guys last week, I think, is that I'll probably inevitably end up getting dragged back into some of those, but it is what it is. The thing that has actually impressed me most about the Marvel model, and to an extent Star Wars, and to a lesser extent, grudgingly, I would say the Fast and Furious movies, although I don't really enjoy them at all, is that throughout all of this, they have at least maintained a certain minimum level of quality. And when we talk about something like, you say, Age of Ultron and the first Captain America being at the lower end of the Marvel scale, I mean, that is still, one would assume, significantly better than a lot of other output that we've had. They seem to have managed to have sustained a certain minimum quality level that I think has been the thing that's reassured punters and has probably garnered them so much box office, is that it is a safe bet. And that, you might not come away thinking that was the best film ever, but I doubt very much whether anyone's come out of any of those films at the cinema and thought, well, that was a waste of 10 quid.
They undoubtedly entertain. But they are like theme parks, and that's fine, but it's like they just don't satisfy is the problem. And I realise that not a lot of people are looking for that, and I wish more people were. Yeah. But it's... I think bland is an unfair word. They're better than that. The Marvel films in particular, but you've got this baseline of competency, which is not the same as quality.
No.
But I just wonder whether people will just kind of get sick on that, just like kind of want something more.
Because inevitably they are becoming increasingly homogenous, right?
Yeah, for the most part, the look has always been really homogenous. It's always been one of my big complaints too, is that they've never looked visually distinctive.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, for me, Drew, the ones that I enjoyed most out of the Marvel movies I've watched have been the sort of slightly more off-kilter ones, like Thor Ragnarok and Doctor Strange.
They look different from the other ones. The other ones tend to be, again, competent, but they don't have a character.
Yeah.
Whereas those do.
And I'm not surprised in that respect. I'm not surprised that so many people enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy, and of all that Marvel output, that seems to be the one that's gathered the most... I don't even... I'm trying to think, how would I put this? The fan base for Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, has more heart invested in that movie than perhaps fans of the Avengers movie has. I think people are possibly more emotionally attached to the Guardians of the Galaxy than they are some of the other ones, because it has a bit more heart and soul.
Peppy tree huggers.
Yeah. And we spoke about this before. I raised the point a while back on the podcast that the thing that I think... And DC are only cottoning on to this now, but the thing I think that Marvel have done really well, that I think has made those films successful where DC haven't, is that DC looked to an action director and that one name, so your Zack Snyder's, to fuel all of their pictures, and it wasn't working for them. Because Zack Snyder, I'm sorry, he might be able to handle special effects, but he's not a great filmmaker, he's not a great storyteller. No. Whereas Marvel seemed to appreciate that the best thing to do if you've got $200 million to spend on one of these movies is, do you know what? If actually ostensibly we're going for humour, hire a proven director of comedies and back him up with the assistants to deliver the action parts.
DC would never have picked Kenneth Branagh or Taika Waititi, you know. But also, DC and their parent company Warner's have no idea what they're doing, and have demonstrated that repeatedly for years and years. And it actually comes back to our first topic about the streaming services and all the executives rushing to, like, we've got to have our thing. And usually without any foresight or patience. And Warner Brothers have been doing that for years. And whereas what Marvel did, and kind of remarkable given where Marvel was when they began.
Oh, yeah.
You know, of having this grand plan. And, you know, unlike George Lucas, I believe that there was a pretty long-term plan in the beginning. I actually believe them when they say it. They have this plan, expanded on for sure, but to sort of do a whole bunch of films, and they had, like, was it 5 or 6 before they got even to the first Avengers film?
Yeah.
And they'd built up a world, built up characters, given every character a chance to breathe before they crammed them all into one film where there was no breathing space.
Yeah.
Warner's looked to that and said, we'll have that, but we'll do it all in one film.
Yeah.
And they had no patience at all. And they basically turned their cinematic universe into something that Pucci could have starred in.
Yeah, they were coming from the wrong place to start with. And I would argue that actually they're making inroads into that now. But again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I will raise the spectre of some of the stuff I think they might have done a little bit more right recently. But the most wrong I have ever been in my life, and let me be clear about this, is when that Phase 3 Marvel roadmap got published back in, was it late 2015 or whatever? And it was like, here's 20 films over 3 years. Suck it up, bad boys. And I remember looking at that on Twitter and being very outspoken about the fact that I thought that was the most arrogant thing I'd ever seen in my life, that it was ridiculous for a studio to try and garner that much attention and soak up in advance, stake their claim to so many screenings, and clearly so many sort of key release dates, and that there was no way that model was sustainable. I thought that was absolute lunacy, and man, was I wrong. Kevin Feige understands that market a lot better than I do, and I'm not ashamed to say it. There's a reason he's getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm not. But yes, that's... yeah, the Marvel model. I don't think it's going away anytime soon, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see now that, to sort of look back round to the start of the conversation and the point that I think you made, Drew, that, or it might have been yourself, Scott, that the actual content seems to be thinning out now in terms of certainly recognisable names and brands within that universe. I suspect now we're getting to the point where they are going to have to really double down on the quality of their output if they're going to get the mass market interested in something like Shang-Chi or... Yeah,
I looked at those lists of names, Craig, and I'm like, that's the thing, is it?
Yeah, I did the double check.
I've never heard of that.
WandaVision?
Yes.
And then someone explained to me what WandaVision was, and I'm like, well, that makes sense, but just in terms of brand recognition. So yeah, that's one of the more interesting things is whether or not this and I don't think trends in cinema necessarily last more than 10 to 20 years, do they? I don't think any trend ever has lasted that long. So history has taught us that probably this will at some point fade away. But in the meantime, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Which takes us on to point number 4, which I basically named Disney Buys Everything. It does exactly what it says in the tin. Consolidation is the name of the game, and I know that I don't want to play that game with you. When Disney announced it was buying Star Wars from George Lucas for $4 billion, we all knew what was coming. And homogenization will be the death of creativity, only as we touched on before, the overall quality of product seems to be going up. So how does this paradox resolve itself? With Fox and Marvel Studios rolled into the fold, with Fox and Marvel Studios rolled into the fold, 2019 saw Disney account for something like 80% of cinema box office revenue, which is mental.
Yes.
Who else can or will Disney look to buy? Do Apple buy Disney? What if we had a whip round and all put a $5 in? Could we buy Disney and put it all back the way it ought to be? Why can things not just remain the same? Progress. Where does this end with the consolidation thing? Because I fear that we've not seen the end of it yet.
Well, we almost have. What's left for them to buy?
You, me, Drew.
What shells of companies can they acquire that they haven't already got? What they're missing? Well, Fast and Furious is Universal, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only significant bit of box office that they're missing. The rest of it, who knows? Who knows? Yes, it's obviously not great if you want anything that is not, well, controlled by Disney. And Disney have shown that understandably, given the position they're in, they want to appeal to absolutely everybody, so they're taking no risks whatsoever with anything, and it's making things suffer. The Marvel films, homogenous. The Star Wars films, homogenous. All the same stuff that's coming through again. Where's all the new stuff going to come from? Well, it's not going to come from Disney.
No, and also in general, I just despise the Disney Corporation because they, particularly in the United States, destroyed what copyright meant.
Yeah.
Basically, they own popular culture, which is worrying apart from anything else. And just stifling to all sorts of creativity. And because it's Disney too, and I know they've had subsidiaries like Buena Vista and Touchstone who have done kind of the slightly edgier stuff, I guess you'd say, but it's just going to be all plasticky and all the rough edges filed off, and just worried that there's going to be so much bland tat with no risk, no edginess, no spark of creativity or soul. And that's the future. So thanks, Disney.
I think the soulless argument, you can level at a lot of stuff. I don't know that it's that Disney are entirely bereft of that and they don't know what to do with it. I have to believe that a company operating at that scale will adapt to the market as required, and I don't think they would allow themselves to die on their arse as the market in general grows bored of homogenous output. I think you'll see them diversify. You're probably already seeing it with Disney Plus. I think something like The Mandalorian, which is arguably the only part of the Star Wars universe that I'm interested in at the minute, because they seem to be doing something interesting with it. I think that probably indicates the fact that they will invest in, maybe edgier stuff as they move forward. I don't think they'll necessarily do it immediately. I think the nature of the beast is to milk the zeitgeist for everything that it's worth. And right now people are just lapping up whatever they put out in the most sort of rote fashion. But there's enough evidence that they're willing to take chances. Even stuff... Sorry, what were you going to say?
Can you see Disney having had released Logan? Because I can't.
No, I don't imagine they would, but what I think you might see is as they consolidate, other sort of brand stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if Disney makes some acquisitions so that they have recognizable brands elsewhere in the market to put that kind of content out without it necessarily being labeled Disney. So like the Buena Vista kind of distribution stuff, but on streaming platform, etc. I don't think I don't think they don't want everybody's money. So I don't think they're going to ignore necessarily any part of the market as they move forward. I think it will depend upon how far along they're allowed to go before competition commissions start taking an interest.
We're not allowed to say the name anymore, but Walt Disney owned Miramax, right? Mm-hmm. And so Miramax is putting a hell of a lot of the freakier content out there. So yes, perhaps they will. Perhaps they will keep that going. How that shows up on their services, I don't know.
I suppose it's interesting to think that Pulp Fiction was effectively a Disney film.
A Disney film.
You make Uma Thurman a Disney princess.
It's canon.
Yes.
I think they're willing to buy. I think there's enough evidence and stuff like where I saw some of the reviews coming in. My wife took the kids to see Frozen 2 today while I was in work. And noticeably, I noticed that torrents of DVD screeners of Frozen 2 have become available. So inevitably, I will end up watching that. And from what I've read of it and the feedback I've had, I think even within something like that, which is essentially just a license to print money, it sounds like they were taking... I was going to say a knock to the head, like some of the choices that they've made apparently with that movie, and it has still performed well at the box office. So I don't think everything's just going to come in white packaging and impact font and just be, a different franchise name stamped on it. That's all Disney are going to output. I'll be interested to see what they do when they take this inverted commas break from Star Wars, because I don't believe it's going to be a significant break. No. I still think they like the money, but I do think what they do with that moving forward, I think they will look back maybe and regret that they stuck two fingers up to Rian Johnson essentially with this last installment of the Skywalker saga and gave it back to J.J. Abrams, who is the most overrated piece of fluff in the industry. And who has yet to produce a great movie. I think they will look back on that with regret at some point in the next few years. But whether or not they still go ahead with that Rian Johnson-led trilogy that they'd promised, I think will be very telling about where they're going to go in future.
It's not directly related to that, I suppose, but my long-term complaint with Disney is that Disney just keep churning stuff out. Because they felt like doing it. I mean, this is going on for far longer than the last 10 years. If you look at The Lion King was a big success, so let's put out 2 to 3 direct-to-video releases and some crappy spin-offs with Timon and Pumbaa and all that kind of thing. And they were doing that for every kind of big hit they had. And they've kind of started doing that with the stuff that they've been buying recently. They've kind of been doing that with Star Wars. There's no real reason to put out a Star Wars film every year other than you just want to make money. Yeah. There was no reason for Toy Story 4 to exist other than you wanted to make some money. There's no great... It's a decent enough film as it turns out, but there's no driving story behind it. There was no need to make that film. No. There wasn't any great narrative compunction behind it, and we've seen that, I think, in the main with these Star Wars films. There's not really been a great story point behind it, any of it, other than we want to put these characters out there and make money. But
again, Scott, though, crucially, none of those were $5 million direct-to-video sequels. No. And again, they've not, with something like Frozen, that's been, what, 5-year gap or something? And
they've not done that one, really, didn't they?
Yeah, they've not done Frozen spin-off films every 6 months, direct to, streaming or direct to video on demand. So I don't know that they didn't learn something of a lesson there, because none of those Star Wars movies, I think on the face of it, can necessarily, I think you could call them cynical, but I don't think you can accuse them of being a cheap cash-in.
Yeah, it actually probably ties into our next point as well. What are you saying with that one? Just in general, studios are making larger and fewer bets. So
yes,
yeah.
Well, there you go. Thank you for that transition to point number 5, which is the one that you touched on earlier, Drew, and it's market polarization, aka mega franchise versus indie shark. So taking all of the previous points into account, the middle ground has all but disappeared from cinemas and decamped onto streaming services. If it's not 150 million plus tentpole, you're now only likely to find a $10 million horror indie. What can it all mean? Drew, I'm going to throw to you because it felt like you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah. What has me worried about is that it will mean that cinema becomes just a place where you see a Marvel film. Because we've talked before about how it seems like there are so many comic films a year, and actually, if you spread it over a year, it's not that many, and compared to the heyday of the Western when there were literally hundreds per year, it seems like nothing except the fact that if you didn't want to see one Western, you might see another, or there'd be something else on, whereas the Marvel films in particular just seem to have sucked all of the oxygen out of cinema, so there's not space or time for anything else.
Yeah, you've got a 10-screen multiplex, they are on 8 screens.
Yeah, and then the cinemas themselves aren't doing themselves any favours, because the trend of cinema change for the most part seems to be, let's not just make people want to come by making this like the best thing possible and making the lowest cost default option amazing. It's like, no, we're going to have lots and lots of gimmicks, but we're going to charge you lots and lots of money for the extra gimmicks.
That's point number 7, so don't do too much on that.
I will not adhere to your rules.
You're a radical.
Yeah, it's... I don't know, it worries me a bit. And I think there's still a lot of strength in like smaller indie stuff, because there are things like your Picture House Cinemas chain and stuff like that, and certainly in bigger cities you're going to have a good art house cinema that's still there, but they tend to have lesser quality projections, smaller screens, maybe not as good sound, maybe it's not as good seating or anything too, so you're not getting quite the benefit of the cinema experience. And I want to be able to go and see some amazing $10 million budgeted indie film on a massive screen as big as I would see a Marvel film. And not all of them necessarily benefit from a huge screen, but I'd still like to see it, and I'm just worried that it's just going to be a case that cinema ends up being a place where you see the franchises and everything else you watch on streaming. And I'll miss it if that happens.
I do worry that moving forward at some point you are literally going to have Marvel cinemas and then repertory, cinemas that show seasonal material or something like that. But I don't even know that would be financially viable at this point. And I think that is where streaming will come in with that size of back catalogue. And again, the quality of the source material available, there probably wouldn't be a reason to leave your living room to see some of that stuff. I think you'll probably move to like a Spotify model whereby curated playlists will replace repertory seasons and such like in that capacity. So I don't know that there is an out for the cinema market in terms of what we're going to see in the next 10 years. I really hope we go back to a bit more diversity, but just in terms of where that, even if Marvel vacated 5 of those 8 screens are taken up, I don't know where the material would be coming from now to fill the other 5. To fill those 5 they've vacated, because it just seems to already be at the point where, it's either, that ultra indie stuff that's coming up probably now would struggle to get, or would struggle to find the money to be, or the deals to be distributed. I don't know. I really don't know. This is one of the points I'm most uncertain about, is what will a cinema look like 10 years from now?
Yeah. I don't know much to add on. Just I miss the days when you could get there's apparently enough of a market for foreign language films to be distributed more widely. Cinema were putting these out a lot. We'd have like Tartan Video putting out seasons of Asian films and Hong Kong action films, all these kind of stuff. And it was great to get an opportunity to see that in cinemas. And while not be keeping as close tabs to it because I'm far away from the cinema, it doesn't really seem to be the case so much these days. And it's harder to see anything that is not just a hugely budgeted tentpole or a garbage horror movie. Yeah.
Remember counter-programming?
Yes.
The counter-programming to Marvel is now DC. That's it. Speaking of which, we'll touch on DC again now. I'll rattle on then to point 6 because I feel depressed talking about point 5 already. at least something positive on the horizon here. Point 6, increasing recognition for female directors, or perhaps increasing opportunity for female directors might be fairer. Warner Brothers finally had its first bona fide superhero hit, critically at least, since Chris Nolan left Batman behind, when they unexpectedly leapfrogged Marvel and employed a female director, Patty Jenkins, to helm Wonder Woman. Marvel were forced to follow suit, kind of, by really generously allowing a female co-director, Anna Boden, to helm Captain Marvel, sorry. Everyone expected things to change, I think it's fair to say, in 2009 when Catherine Bigelow got the Best Director nod at the Oscars that year for 2008's The Hurt Locker. Only nothing really much seemed to happen until a number of high-profile Hollywood males finally got called out for their despicable behaviour. And a larger discussion emerged around the industry as a whole, being forced to acknowledge its treatment of women in general. Does this movement have legs, Scott? If so, where will they take it in the next decade? I don't feel like we're out of the woods on this one yet, necessarily.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so. It's always better to have more perspectives on story. So it's better to have any particular story approached from any number of angles, and I think the female voice has been lessened over the past few decades. There's not been as much of that as we'd like. That is seemingly making some kind of inroads. Apparently, last year was a record year for a number of female directors and writers and such, but it's still pretty low bar and still not actually all that high. Yeah. And there's an awful lot of pushback from arseholes on the internet who don't seem to understand how sexism works and what institutional sexism and racism is. And that's depressing to see, but hopefully that's the dying flame of old farts who will die out in time.
You have to hope it's the dead cat bounce of that kind of attitude, right?
Yeah. Not sure what I've got more to add about it other than, yes, it's really good, and go and see Little Women if you haven't. Greta Gerwig's film is very good. Loved it.
I'm desperate to see it, actually, which I never thought I'd hear myself saying about that. Yeah. Drew, did you have anything to input on this one?
No, I'm just somewhat concerned that it might lose momentum.
Mm-hmm.
That if it's because it's a called celeb at the moment, and people are thinking we'll do this, and you get more female directors coming into bigger projects. That's the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
There have always been female directors working in indie stuff, maybe less well represented, maybe not getting the opportunities, but they've been there. But for bigger, more prominent stuff, great, get more female directors in. But I'm worried that instead of people thinking, right, this is just a general good and fair, then we keep it. It's if the news cycle moves on and that sort of impetus goes, we'll just go back to what we know, which is the concern I have a wee bit.
This is the thing. This is what worries me as well, Drew. And looking back, I think the Catherine Bigelow thing maybe shouldn't have given us as much hope, because when you look at Catherine Bigelow as a director and her output and her choice of material,
which we have,
yeah, exactly. Which I would thoroughly recommend you listen to that episode. I am not on it, but don't let that put you off. It shouldn't. You guys discussed at great length some of Bigelow's output. She is a super safe bet in terms of a female director, in terms of tending to the market status quo, in that she is, I suppose, in many ways, in terms of theme and style, what you would probably consider more traditionally more of a masculine director. She is not, or hasn't up until this point, really put out all that much that you would suggest would be material necessarily aimed at a predominantly female market. And the thing that worries me about it is that if you remember probably about 10 years ago, there was this big realization that, the silver pound, the silver dollar, that the aging population was a huge untapped market. And we started to see a lot more films come out that were thematically relevant to an older age group. And brilliant, it should be thus, the market demands it. But just in terms of basic numbers and how demographics work, you would still think that a safer bet for studios to recognise would be 51% of the world's population being underserved in terms of representation in cinema. And not just in terms of, hey, let's put out an early 2000s Matthew McConaughey rom-com or a Christmas romantic comedy, which seems to be the only real material aimed at a predominantly female market, aside from something like Twilight Saga, which should have been a massive wake-up call that the demographic that landed with was predominantly a young female audience who absolutely who those movies spoke to on a level that of completely no interest or relevance to you or I. And again, it should be thus. Those movies weren't made for us. And that's the way it should be. And it still baffles me that in response to how much money those movies took, it has still taken Patty Jenkins helming Wonder Woman, and it almost felt like DC were to an opportunistic response to the Me Too movement. It didn't feel like something they had been planning for some time. That felt like a decision on their part to cash in and take a gamble on a movement, and it paid off massively for them. I'm just baffled that this is still a thing, that the studio system is not serving a demographic that are still not being shown anything like the respect and the consideration that you would imagine would make economic sense in terms of the numbers out there. Just baffling. And for that reason, I share your concern, Drew, that I'm worried the steam might go out of this. Purely from exposing myself to material I might not watch otherwise. I think people like Marielle Heller, and you mentioned not Patty Jenkins, Greta Gerwig, are outputting material now that I have enjoyed immensely, and I'm challenging myself a bit in terms of movies that I wouldn't traditionally have watched. So I would never, 2-3 years ago, Little Women just wouldn't have been in my wheelhouse at all. I wouldn't have paid it any mind whatsoever, and I'm genuinely interested to see it now. And I think the three of us would probably agree that we are more open to challenging. But it's not that I don't think we had closed perspectives and stuff, but in terms of that, I think probably the three of us would agree that we are ready and waiting for more of that stuff.
Yeah, well, apparently in 2019, of the top 100 grossing films, women directors represented 10.6%, up from 4.5%. So that's still substantially less than the 50% you would expect if it was on a more equitable level. So
there's got to be something in the culture as well, because in terms of executives, people like, she's no longer Apple now, Amy Pascal, very much a rarity.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about Twilight, Craig, which I'd rather not, because it's appalling, and the books are, by all accounts, appalling. So if that's popular with people, it's because they have no taste, not because of their gender. But there have been 5 films, I think, and only one of them, the first one, was directed by a woman.
Yeah.
So it's like that was released, got very, very popular, and they immediately thought, well, we better give that to a man then. Because the first one, budget of 37 million, box office of 400 million, directed by a woman. They thought, oh, well, we kind of have a woman doing that.
Yeah.
You get the feeling that that's basically the thinking. Was, this is bigger than we thought, better give that into a safe pair of male hands now, male and white preferably.
Yeah, and forget about calls of, being woke or meninist or the rest of it. Just from an economic point of view, these companies are supposed to be about making money, and it's just a massive, massive oversight. It's just baffling. It is possibly the most baffling aspect of cinema this century, I suppose, that cinemas would be, the people greenlighting material would have a great wake up moment around the 60+ market, but not women in general. Weird. But there you go. And that leaves us then on point number 7, Drew, which you touched on. And we spoke about this, I think, off mic prior to another episode the other week. Cinema's doubling down on gimmicks. In the face of falling overall revenues and the flanking manoeuvres of streaming giants, cinema seems not to have learned its lesson. and is opting to entrench itself in a number of added costs in an effort to attract people back. What this appears to amount to is seats that shake while farting and weeing on you, for which you can expect to pay £5 over the odds of a regular seat. As I mentioned to you guys, which I think started this conversation the other week there, director James Mangold gave a great interview on the Ringers Big Picture podcast recently, where he nailed this absolutely on the head, asserting that if he were the cinema industry, he'd be making laser projection and high-end Dolby audio the absolute minimum cinema experience, not charging extra money for it. Does cinema as we know it survive the next 10 years? Netflix is reopening mothballed cinemas, albeit for limited engagements. Is the future of cinema in either those limited engagements or streaming houses for prestige pictures? Drew, what does a cinema look like 10 years from now?
Best case scenario, more or less, is a look now. Which, not brilliant, but I can live with that. It would still be there to go and see stuff. I don't know, I kind of worry that we'll just have the big multiplexes just showing the latest Marvel film and not a lot else. I don't know. I honestly think it's not going to change all that much. Maybe the 3D gimmick will finally go away. We can but hope. I don't know. No, I don't know. I really can't gauge this one at all.
I mean, the thing for me is, where else can they go? Right? They've tried 3D and it's been a moderate success. I've not seen a movie in 3D for 5 years. I know they're still showing them, but I make a point to go to 2D ones because I like to be able to see what's going on the screen, not see some.
Yeah, but again, now Scott, I think it's only the tentpole stuff that is in 3D now. They've even done away with. Yeah, they've even done away with the mid-tier stuff being sort of retrofitted after the fact as 3D now. They seem to have given up on that.
Yeah, thankfully, and rightfully so, because the number of films that enhanced was zero. As even the ones that were supposed to be tentpoles for it that we all went to see and went, okay, let's show us Avatar then. And it's like, nope, it just looks terrible.
Yes. Avatar was great in slightly murkier shades of blue, Scott.
Yes. I was going to make a point of going to see a film in 4DX, as Cineworld would have it, but the only one they're showing is Rise of Skywalker, and I don't particularly want to see that again. So I've not yet experienced being weed and farted on, but I thought it was just the movie that shaked. I didn't realise it had an aromatherapy component to it as well. But yes, that's a clear gimmick that is not going to get off the ground.
Winds, water, aromas, you name it, Scott.
Right. I think everyone can see that's a failure from the outset. What's left to do in cinemas? The only thing I can think of is if you have some cinemas dedicated to some kind of VR experience. There was some attempt, I think, a few years back to start making like virtual reality films where you could kind of do a bit more kind of walkie aroundy type interactive type stuff and a bit more sort of 360 like the old Disney attractions where they're kind of projecting up onto a dome, those kind of like more immersive like surround scope kind of experiences, but I can't see how you would tell a narrative in that, so I don't think that's got any legs to it. So
that only works for the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, Sudden Death.
or anyone where he does a particularly impressive spin kick, I think.
I was just thinking more from inside a sports stadium point of view. If I want a film projected on a dome for an immersive experience.
But ultimately, despite what all we've tried to do with cinema over the past 100 years, it's always just reduced to projecting something onto a screen, and that seemed with a decent sound component to it as well. So I really don't see it changing very much. There'll probably just be less of them.
Yeah, I don't really understand your pessimism about the 4DX thing, Scott. I mean, there's at least 10 per any given cinema, at least 10 seats that have that. So they're really they're betting hard on that one, right? Yeah. I think the way forward, the way they should go, whether they'll go that way or not, is just to like you were saying with the James Mangold thing, it's just increase the basic, like the base level of having very high quality screen, very high quality projection. A lot of films, cinemas are still in that horrible bit where they went to digital projection, but they're still kind of relatively old LCD projectors that still smear like nothing on earth, like lots of motion blur. So upgrade those projectors. It's not cheap, so that's the problem too. It requires a lot of investment. But like really comfortable seats, probably reclining seats, better quality screens and better quality projectors, and then just your typical high quality cinema surround sound. And then clamp down on people talking or using their phones. And I'm not saying you should punch them in the face, but you should probably punch them in the face.
No, you should probably pay, I don't know, someone to turn up and be an usher.
Yeah. So you like to improve the actual experience. Just increase the baseline without paying for gimmicks. It's like, right, here's what you pay to go into the cinema, and you get a really comfy seat, an excellent screen, good sound, and you're not annoyed by arseholes around you. That could be the key thing. I think things are particularly bad in that regard in the United States. You get it in the UK sometimes where I go to the cinema, fortunately, it's really rare. But it's just, people just seem to go into those places and not realising that it's a public place with a shared experience and thinking it's their own living room. And just, I honestly cannot understand that thinking. It's alien to me. But yeah, if they have some sort of basic thing like an usher, yes, maybe you could clamp down on that sort of nonsense and improve the experience for everybody. People would want to go. Crazy thought, huh?
The overwhelming sort of impression for me now is that you walk into a multiplex now and you have this huge building with like 14 screens or something like that, and it appears to be manned by 5 people tops.
Yeah.
Which is, and you know, there are no projectionists anymore. You buy your ticket yourself when you come in on a touchscreen, or you get it when you're buying your confectionery if you do that. And then someone from the confectionery counter ends up running over to take ticket stubs when the screening's going in. I've been saying for a while now that I'm going to give my friend Isla a shout, because to the best of my knowledge, she is still a cinema manager for Odeon, and I keep threatening to just give her a shout and say, can I please come up and just see what a cinema looks like behind the screens now? Because I think for something so heavily entrenched in the arts and that promises to deliver, or at its best can deliver the most emotionally resonant of experiences, I think they are the most soulless enterprises on earth at the minute.
They're not making Cinema Paradiso remakes these days, are they?
No, and I don't understand why they keep searching for the next gimmicks. Like you said, I myself have considered going to see Rise of Skywalker in 4DX, and I thought at first it'd be a clever thing to do just to go and sit in one of those seats and laugh at how silly it is loudly and ruin the experience for everyone else in the cinema for 2 hours just to make a point. And the problem is that purely on principle, I don't want to give them the money.
Yes.
Because it will be interpreted, regardless of my intent, it will be interpreted as an endorsement.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to have my 15 quid for that, because it's nonsense. And I can't imagine anything removing me from the experience more.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being less immersed in a movie than having a water pistol squirt water in my face whilst being shaken violently about
Rumble
to the
packs
tune of the
work for games,
subwoofer. It's baffling. And you made the point way back in the day, Scott, when they were trying to sell 3D as an extra when Avatar came out, and we were being sold the lie that it's because it was more expensive to produce 3D films. And you quite succinctly knocked that on the head with your observations around, Titanic being the most expensive film made at the time, and I don't remember having to pay £2 extra to see it.
Yeah.
I don't know when cinemas are going to stop trying to sell us gimmicks. They either want our business or they don't, and I can't think of any other industry that with such poor judgment makes these decisions around trying to ask you more money for an experience that should just be a great experience to start with. As people are leaving cinemas, aside from how well, the Avengers movie and these big franchises are doing, overall numbers for cinema attendance are still going down. And I don't know any other business that would not be doing everything it could to attract people back without trying to get more money out of them for it. When every other single gimmick they have ever tried has failed.
Well, rather than thinking, our business is changing, perhaps if we want to survive, we should do something, it's more like they've basically collectively thrown their toys out the pram.
Yeah.
Especially with this nonsense with you've put this thing on Netflix and you've not put it in but they don't owe it to you.
Yeah.
Give people a reason to want to put their films in your cinemas.
this is what's interesting for me moving forward, and I meant to mention this earlier when we were talking about one of the Disney points, is that I do wonder what happens when Disney decide that they want a 30-day cinema window, or do they still make enough money past 30 days that they wouldn't just immediately want to put stuff on their streaming platforms? Because I think it's one thing Netflix coming in with their content, and saying, well, we want a 30-day release window, and the cinema's sticking two fingers up. I think it's quite another when Disney, who are responsible for 80% of revenue through cinema doors, turn around and say this and demand the same thing.
Yeah.
I suspect we will see some movement from the cinemas then, and I also suspect it's going to happen.
Yeah. Seems reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll be interested to see what happens there. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel like this all boils down to consumer choice, and I feel like, you know, the content is still there. It's just moved elsewhere. And I think what happens now depends upon how people choose to vote with their money. I think just the problem I have is that historically people are terribly bad at voting with their money.
Or voting.
Yeah, yes. Especially when it comes to voting with their wallets, though. I think we are quite happy to endorse by proxy, the Chinese government's human rights record by insisting that all of our consumer goods are manufactured there because it's a lot cheaper, because they don't have a minimum wage there. And we're quite happy to turn a blind eye to that. And that's why our high streets are full of Primarks and various other stuff now. I think as consumers, generally speaking, not we three, but I think the market in general values cost and convenience over all else. I don't think people are willing to necessarily pay a premium for their entertainment the way that certain other things have been polarised, such as the fashion market is now completely polarised in terms of either ultra cheap or prestige luxury brands. There is no middle ground anymore. Absolutely the same thing happening with entertainment as well, certainly at a cinema level. And yeah, it just remains to be seen whether or not the likes of the streaming platforms, if and when that cinema business becomes less financially viable, whether they polarise the same way. But I suspect that'll be some way out. I don't know. I wonder what we'll be talking about next decade.
Telling you, virtual reality. We'll all be jacked into the mainframe. Have you seen The Matrix? It's going to be like that.
I was thinking more Craig Charles.
Oh my God. Awooga. And on that note, having raised that spectre, thank you very much for listening to an hour and a quarter of our drivel. As always, if you have any feedback, you are more than welcome to reach out to us through the usual avenues. I won't bother to mention them. All other feedback, all other contact is more than welcomed. And in the meantime, all that remains is for me to say thank you very much. I was Craig Eastman, Scott was Scott.
Goodbye.
And Drew was Drew.
Hasta luego.
See you again soon.